of to kind of go back when I was saying the difficulty of leaving or recognizing is it's not unusual for them either to say that I'm going to call up the place where your parent works and tell them that you did this, or I'm going to send a naked picture of you to your mom who's the CEO of a big company. They find any way to manipulate the person into doing what they need them to do. And it's far reaching sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that goes into um, something that I think is the inverse perception, where people who are successful or who have a lot in their lives, family, a good job, whatever people would define as successful, as it being less likely to impact them. But in my opinion, it's actually the inverse, where because they have all these things that other people have or want or covet, or all these connections and everything, those are more avenues of attack for their abuser to use against them. Those are more things that they have to sort out in order to extricate themselves from that situation. And one of the things that again, I think, is that a lot of times a life gets built with the abuser, and then the the difficulty of extrication is the difficulty of essentially sacrificing that life. Um, and that's difficult, especially, going back to if you have kids, because you have to figure out, okay, how do they work within this new life that I'm building outside of the abusive relationship, knowing full well that that's going to come into it in some way.
No, and that's another really good point. Is that when your lifestyle sometimes depends on it, whether one has the money, the other, it's the person a lot of times that controls it. The reality is it might change drastically. And how do you also look at that it isn't always taken care of in the systems the way that we think it should be? Because and whenever with any of this, I don't think the abuser or they ever really you're never going to get them to pay. I don't know if pay is the right word, but even with victims in general, um, to feel for what they've done to you. Nothing is going to, whether going to jail, any that it's the hurt and the pieces that have been taken away. It's learning really how do you start to find yourself again regardless of the other person. And I'm not saying that nothing should be done. It's unfortunately you also have to look at the reality of the systems and and what to expect, and regardless of that you still deserve to be whole and to build yourself up, regardless of if everybody finds out what the person did or he gets in trouble for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a very important thing to recognize. And I'm happy you brought that up, that, you know, as you said, regardless of the situation, everybody deserves better than that. And with that in mind, and also keeping in mind we only have a limited amount of time, I did want to talk about some of the important stuff. Uh, Not that any of this is not important, but some resources and ways to ask for help and finding help, ways to all of those things that might help educate our audience on what they can do. So I guess my question around that is, what's the I guess the biggest one, what's the first step?
Well, I have there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which you could also text START to 88788, or there's the 1-800 799 7233. So that's national. Um, to be able to look at some of the resources. What I recommend is to call a local police department and see if they have advocates or social workers. A lot of departments do now. The city of Chicago has a whole domestic violence hotline that even has interpreters. So I know that when I work with clients that didn't their first language wasn't English, to have an interpreter, and a lot of if by calling a hotline to do that, and with that the hotlines also can give resources and information, but domestic violence, their agencies, um, there's a lot of resources out there, and but the first thing I would do is probably see if your local police department has a social worker or an advocate there. And also the courthouses, in Illinois now, or Cook County, domestic violence actually has its own court, and there's advocates and a lot of information that you can get by calling there. So it's but even just Googling, domestic violence in your state or your county, usually resources will, come up.
Thank you for that. We will add those numbers to the description. Just if anybody who's watching this does need help, please call those numbers, call those people, Google those things. Um, the other thing that you talked about just Googling, um, but we touched on it a little bit. A lot of it is control. In these situations, the abuser is probably checking browser history, phone history, things of that nature. Is there like a tactic or a way to get over that or get around that?
If you're able to go to like your local library, if they have computers there, or to do it at work or with a friend, on some of the websites that they'll say, hit this if the person's coming in, but to remember, if you can, to erase the browser every time. But I mean, you do have to be careful. There are so many ways now to be able to track, that what I would recommend first is going to see if the library has a computer, so that you don't leave that digital footprint. Um, the other thing I also will sometimes say is to open up a PO box, so that if you want to start looking for information, maybe contacting a lawyer, gathering information, it goes to the PO box, and not in your town, but maybe in a different town, so that you can start having mail go there, or to somebody that you trust, to start gathering, maybe documents, making copies of birth certificates, of your passport, insurance cards that he might or she might have that they take away, so that you have copies of everything all the time. Those are some things to keep in mind, so that you're prepared, at any point, because a lot of times what helps the most is educating yourself, getting information, and being prepared, so that if you have to do it, you at least have some things with you that might make it a little bit easier.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Um, from the other side of it, as a friend, as a family member, what 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 do you do?
I think the thing is, to listen and to even say, I will get information for you, or, go with them to talk about it. The thing that is very hard is that, you know, you can't always tell someone what to do. I think at the beginning, listening, um, what happens, and even it still happens with me too sometimes when I'm with clients and you hear something, and you start getting all ramped up and angry, or anxious, because I can't believe this is happening. But what's helpful is to also try to help yourself kind of stay calm too, because that would then may help the person be able then to come to you. If it's not easy, but if you feel that you'd like to be a resource, and letting them come, but also being careful, you can't put yourself in danger either, of going over to the house and saying, you're going to stop this now, or to be able, again, one, to listen, to be there, but also understand that there are certain limits, to what you can do, and to start gathering information. And sometimes it could be months, years. So every time they come, they talk about it, and then give them the packet, and keep giving them. I think the biggest thing is keep giving them the same message over and over again. That that I'll go with you to talk to someone. I'll go with you to talk to someone, or whatever it is, that you're, because you can't always change their mind. You can't always convince them. You can't. You could say how you feel, but I think the thing is that, to know that this could be a long process, and to be consistent in the message.
Yeah,
It's hard.
absolutely. One of the things that you brought up reminded me um, of an experience from when I was much younger, and thought I was filled with righteous fury and all of that ill-advised nonsense of, I had a friend. I was in high school, and her boyfriend was hitting her, and I took it upon myself to confront them, and it made things worse. Um, and that is something in my experience that I do want to throw out there, is that as much as a friend, family member, as much as you want this, as you want to be able to fight this battle for the people that you love, it is not your fight to win or be a part of. You can provide support or whatever, but when you try to do that, from what I've seen, it you end up having the opposite result.
Because I think what happens is you have two people, that, and then there's this intense relationship. The third person comes in, and then things oftentimes might die down a little bit, and then all of a sudden, the abuser then, oh, you're going to tell people, or it's really being careful in the fact that, you can't save somebody. And I think that that's the hardest part, even as professionals, of sometimes your job is, again, to be there as support, to, what it, and it's hard, again, not to be reactive, but to, when we start to think about, they're telling us something, what is it that, why are we wanting to respond the way that we are we wanting to fix it? Are we wanting to save it? Is it becoming too much for us to hear, that we want it just to stop? And so when you're able to also kind of pay attention to yourself and how it is for you, that could also help with some of the boundaries of what you can manage and tolerate, because it is intense and it's difficult. And that's why, I said it, giving the same message over and over again. If somebody is saying the same thing and keeps coming to you, and you still want to be supportive of, okay, we have the packet, I'll make the call with you, and they say, no, I'm not ready, but you keep giving that same message, and it also helps ground you a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is, even now, I like to think of myself as older and wiser. Running or encountering somebody in that situation, your first instinct is, okay, I'm going to go fix this. And it it takes a lot as a, for me anyway, maybe for other people they instinctively know, but for me it takes a lot to recognize that uh you can't, you can help, you can assist, but you, this is outside of your power to fix.
Well, and I think too, when you care, you're empathic, and also if you've gone through something, it's that wanting. Sometimes you kind of know what might happen or what it feels like for the kids, and wanting to save them from that, and that's what's so hard. And I think that that was a lot of the work that I had to do myself the first 10 years of doing, because to me, if I couldn't save somebody, I wasn't doing a good job. And because you want so much to help make it better, and sometimes that is, it's not anything with you, it's the situation and what that person's ready for. But you don't, the one thing that I will say is you don't realize how much of an impact you might have at the time, where you might not hear from somebody, let's say, but then 5 years later, they come back, and whatever you did in that time was, could again, is a small piece of what eventually got them to the place that they could make a change. And that's important to remember with anything. You don't always see the results. A lot of times in this work, you don't see it because but the fact that you spent time with them, you listened, you didn't judge them, that that's a big deal. So you're doing more than you realize, you just don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you're right, but it brings me back to like my own therapy experiences where uh, I'll get a message in therapy, or sometimes even from friends, family, whatever. And I think everybody can hopefully everybody can relate to this at least a little bit. And then you hear it and you're like, okay, yeah, that's right, but whatever. And then for me, it feels like years later, it it sinks in
Yeah.
and you kind of absorb it and appreciate it and can act on it. Whereas before, like I knew that it was correct and I knew what it was saying, but I wasn't really absorbing it the way that I would now be um, years later. But I think that that's to build on what you're saying, or actually to just repeat what you were saying. I think that is something to keep in mind, is that especially when you're in those high stress circumstances, the information doesn't get absorbed right away. It just doesn't.
Which is why asking someone or to go with you, or you go with them if they go to speak to a domestic violence professional, or they go talk to a lawyer. And I am not an expert in this, but I do know, the research into the brain and how much it's affected even by the abuse growing up, or even, so that's another point when you think about why it doesn't absorb right away. Well, um, when you've lived a certain, they, or had to deal with certain things, when they do, and I might be, I think it's a PET scan, but I'm not positive, and they're able to look at the parts of the brain that light up and don't, they can see differences with people that have been in abusive, homes, or, and that it takes a while. And your brain is, it's amazing how it can heal, but it takes a while to be able, for that to happen, the neural pathways. I'm not trained in that, but I know that there's a lot of research being done, which is also helpful, I think, for people that go through it, and to understand that it's, just like when your arm breaks, your bone has to heal. So does the brain.
I think that's a really good point, and that did kind of inspire another question. What I mean, obviously, when you're in it, the goal is to get out of it. But what about the the aftermath? What about the, okay, well, I have built a semblance of a new life, um, and without my abuser, and I like it, and I'm generally happy, but things creep back in, or whatever. What what can help there, if that makes any sense?
Well, I think the biggest thing too is your identity gets lost in the relationship, and who you are, especially when you start to question yourself, and like if your beliefs are challenged because of maybe what you had to cope with when you were there. And so some of that in the work is just getting, who am I, separate from that? What's important to me? And to really start looking at that. And then when you start making decisions based on those things, you start to become stronger in who you are, what you believe in. Because I think what happens, again, when we talk about, it doesn't matter your education or success, you have to give parts of yourself up in order to survive. Because if I don't believe in certain things, but the abuser is doing it, and I can't get out of it, you then begin to, I think, more to attack yourself, even more so than the abuser. And to be able to look at, to heal that, and making decisions at the time. But now going back to really the core of who are you, and what's important, what do you want to focus on? Because as you become more of an I again, then you're separating yourself from the relationship, and things that are important. But you have to grieve it too. And that was one other thing I wanted to bring up, that a lot of people don't understand. Oh, you're divorced, you're away from it now. There's a grieving period, because at one point there was something that drew you together. You had a family, you had a lot of times a belief or a vision of what you thought it was going to be, and it didn't happen. But to respect that process, and don't, again, I think, beat yourself up for the steps you have to take to go through it, whether you grieve it or not, whatever you have to do. It's so important that to allow that to happen, and to respect the process. And it's different for everybody. But because when you begin to look at, or you don't like something, to look at, okay, what is it about this, and to look at what's important to me, and start making the decisions based on that. And it's hard, because you might start to do things differently, and it might impact your other relationships, because you're changing, which is a good thing. But it also, it's not easy.
Yeah, thank you for that. That made me think of my own experience of, when I was a kid, so much of, and at least somewhat extricated from it, so much of how I characterize myself was having gone through that. And, it feels like at the time, it felt like a badge of honor, or whatever, again, nonsense. Um, but there definitely was a point in my life where that needed to stop being a core part of me, if that makes any sense. Like it's it's still something and it's always going to be a part of me, but it needed to stop being the core of it because like it holds you back. It held me back. Uh,
That's you know, you said exactly. I think that that's what happens is when we have a major issue happen to us, like abuse, or we begin to identify, is that who we are, instead of recognizing it's a piece of us, but it isn't who we are. And we, just because this happened growing up, we deserve to be loved, or in a healthy relationship, or to be a parent, because we aren't what that person might have told us, or how they made us feel.
yeah, yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing that. It makes a lot of sense. It clicked for me. Like, oh, this is this is how things unfolded in my own life. Um, with that said, and being cognizant of time, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This was an amazing conversation, and I definitely want to be able to have a conversation around this and around these types of things that are affecting more people than I think most people realize. So thank you so much, Sherry.
Thank
Thanks
you.
as always to Ali. Um, and thank you to Lamco Wellness for sponsoring this and for allowing us to have this very real and I think very needed conversation. Uh, thanks.
Bye.